A very good evening to all the members who have enrolled for this session. Myself, CA Rekha Umashik, Regional Council Member, SIRC. I take immense pleasure in welcoming you all to the session on enterprise risk management. So to tell about this topic, this is one of the widely discussed topic these days, which is very, very relevant. Seeing the number of risks that an organization is subjected to, be it financial, strategic, or even operational risk, we need to contain the risk to an acceptable level. So I repeat this statement again because a risk is something which you cannot eliminate, which you cannot negate as a whole. There is some element of risk which will always persist, even if you try to put the best mitigation measures. So this is one area where how you could contain the risk to an acceptable level, to be precise within the risk appetite of an organization. So what are the methods or how you can go ahead plan, how you could go ahead control and supervise the organization at the organization level so that you can reduce the risk is all the topic all about. So today we have the faculty member Dipen Trivedi sir. Sir is a chartered accountant. So again, sir, welcome to the session. So sir is a chartered accountant, having almost 2 decades of experience in management consulting as well as industry roles, specifically catering to the infrastructure. Sir comes with a rich experience in infrastructure development, capital projects, real estate assets throughout their life cycle, India as well as globally. Currently, Sir is leading the capital projects consulting advisory practice at Deloitte India, Mumbai as the director. Sir has also been the solution lead for enterprise risk management and also has a hands-on experience in finance functions, risk management, governance, internal control, project management, and change. I think to be summarized, we can say the entire ERM area, he has a wide exposure. He has also served as a chief finance and compliance officer for a real estate and civil contracting company, and also Sir is a collaborator, contributor, as well as a coach and a mentor by practice. And to be very specific, he's a regular faculty member at ICAI corporates in several institutions and also a member of the Professional Development Committee ICAI in WIRC, Western India Regional Council. His specifically to say his managerial and the functional skills includes business and strategic planning, risk management, financial management, audit and compliance, policy procedure development, and performance improvement. So it is, I take immense honor in welcoming you to the session, sir. The session is all yours.
Just a voice check at my end. Good evening to everyone. It's my second time around presenting this, and I'm really happy. Thank you everyone at SIRC. And in the next, I would say 115 minutes, let us make it interactive because a monologue never helps. And what I bring today is a sum total of experiences, not just mine, but every senior, every peer, everyone who's seen risk, who's practiced risk and practices risks on a daily basis at various scales and various levels. So let's get started. And to give a very, very clinical understanding in terms of what we will do in the next, say, 85 to 90 minutes is, we'll focus on 3 aspects. First, let's define risk, because we keep uttering and keep chatting about risk all the time. Then let's give it a meaning in terms of a measure or a yardstick in which we all can talk in a universal language. So let's talk about the frameworks, because once you define the rule, the game gets clearer, it gets interesting. And as we tread along these slides, and trust me, there are just 20 of them, there is going to be plenty of insights when we talk at each of those slides. We'll talk about what is extremely important today to sustain risk. Building risk and a risk aware culture is probably everyone talking around, but sustaining risk is a problem statement for the most evolved organizations also today, because in order to sustain excellence, one needs to excel every single time in terms of what they're doing. And lastly, let's talk about the trends, because the uncertainties, Mind you, I said uncertainties and not threats. Uncertainties are at their level best today, and there is no guarantee of tomorrow. So, what are the trends? What do we probably as risk professionals, risk owners, risk champions should be focusing on and pick up a cue in terms of what to probably start practicing, start developing from a sustainable ERM perspective is the last part before we get into an interaction mode. And I look forward to interacting. I have the best of the brains attending this, and let me make it upfront that even I am learning because the learning never stops. So please interact once we get into and get through all these slides. We've absorbed these slides, right? So here I begin. I will share my screen, and CA Rekha, just give me a thumbs up once you're able to see the screen as well. Thank you. So what is ERM? I think we've read ample number of times about ERM, but the simplest definition, friends, which sits with me, which sits in my mind, is how I summarize it here in this 360-degree circle. ERM is a process effected by the people at all levels, applied across the enterprise, starts with strategy setting. And I'm going to make a path breaking statement here because people associate ERM only at a strategic level and probably think that it is only at an enterprise level. But the game is changing, my friends, and I'm here to probably talk a little bit more about it. I will talk about a transition from ERM to ORM. We will soon see that in the slides. But again, continuing with the definition here, in strategy setting or starts with strategy setting and is designed to identify potential events and in managing risks within those with a clear cut risk appetite, which in the course will provide the stakeholders and the people who are at the helm of management that the organization is geared and is moving towards the stated objectives, right? Process, people, enterprise, strategy, events, assurance, meeting of objectives. That's the simplest way of putting ERM. And what does it take? As I mentioned and as we learned, that it's not one man probably who's responsible, or it is not just a few set of people who are in the governance. Everyone involved with an organization is playing a part and is a risk champion. And more importantly, since we work across multiple disciplines, there are a lot of disciplines which come together to run a business successfully. The coherence and the cohesion of all these standards and all these disciplines is extremely important to walk in one direction and hence work productively and achieve the goals. And typically we've seen, this is also a risk statement, that when there is a faction which follows COSO 17 and there is another section which only is scared and probably is working on ISO 45000, from a safety, from a QM perspective, and all these heads, if by chance are not talking to each other, then there is a disaster waiting to happen. And it is the onus of a chief risk officer along with the management to get all the standards homogenized. And trust me, friends, it is not an easy task. If we are in the process of setting up enterprise risk management and are redefining the risk appetite and the risk analysis process, it is extremely important to start with all the pieces which are working, though in isolation, but perfectly fine, whether it is to do with an health and safety or whether it is to do with quality. All these pieces of standards and practices is extremely important to build a successful and sustainable ERM. So bring all of them together under one umbrella. And guess what? We all have seen this cube, and this cube is further complemented by ISO 31000, which is, in simple terms, these rule books are writing standards. They're talking about an integral approach. All they are talking about is address uncertainty. What they are preaching is be systematic and structured and try and create a culture which is inclusive, which is dynamic. Yeah, because uncertainties keep evolving. So it is in the nature of a process or a system to also evolve if it really wants to be ahead and mitigate and continuously help the organization improve and achieve its objectives. So golden words, standard words, but so integral to a practitioner of risk management. And if all these aspects are kept at the back of the mind, when we design a risk management framework, there is no objective which cannot be achieved, come what may, whatever be the uncertainties around. So we move ahead. We understood the definition. We understood what are the standards which help us guide. But then when we are setting the game, what are the key components of enterprise risk management or risk management to begin with? Let's take a quick look at these 6 fundamental components, and we'll quickly browse past what they actually do stand for in the successive slides. So to begin with, when you want an organization, or when you probably have your own set of agendas or own objectives to achieve at a personal level also, we are all risk managers, right? Every day when we get up in the morning, irrespective, we are all managing risks, right? Risks of investments, risks of health, risks of arriving on for a meeting on time, risks for ensuring that the presentation happens perfectly and there are no power faults or power defaults, or we are all trying to make ourselves one level up the risks that we are facing. So we are all risk managers, but there is one underlying: the moment we set objectives, we will always have an appetite. Nobody, consciously or unconsciously, will set up risks less goals, or will set up goals which will not be achievable. And there will always be an underlying appetite. We all know what our appetite is. Where the organizations or individuals do not know their underlying appetite, they will never meet their goals. There will be more failures, because it is important to know what constitutes, or what is the outer line or an outer limit for us to achieve our objectives. Strengths and weaknesses, as we call it, friends, SWOT analysis. So risk appetite is the first focal point where the organization will try and set up a document or a philosophy which is underlying their business plan. So they set a goal, right? We all set a goal. Organization sets a goal, and that goal will have a horizon from a year to a 3-year to a 5-year typically. And each year we will take a pause and we will go through what was achieved, what could be achieved, and what is to be achieved. And every step will again be remeasured against the appetite that the organization had, and where did we cross the line? And were we lucky? Sometimes. Were we unlucky? Yes. Whenever we crossed a line, we probably, if we were not planned and well prepared, we suffered losses or setbacks. So risk appetite is that underlying philosophy which the organization, through its board and executives, sets up such that every constituent of the organization will view the entire risk perception for their business and their set of transactions in one single lens. It is not open to individual interpretations any further, right? It clearly defines that it is not mine or your appetite, it is the organization's appetite. And this is the way we want our organization to be perceived. And for the entire set of appetite is broken down into several categories. And for each category, the moment you keep a matrix, you keep a limit or you set a limit, quantifiable or qualifiable, you arrive at your tolerances. So that's the first point. As soon as you have your appetites, you more importantly want to identify how do you run this risk management process? How do you ensure that there are people at all the layers across the organization, right from a sponsor to an executioner, to an executive body, to a risk owner, to a risk champion in the risk pyramid? How do each one of them come together, take a reporting, move things ahead in the forward direction with utmost productivity? So once you set up the risk governance structure, business as usual starts 360 days. Identifying risks, analyzing risks, and then treating these respective risks and ensuring that the plan is actually working systematically, and every person who has a need to know is able to understand that the risks are pretty nicely managed and the objectives are being achieved, and wherever the risks are not probably achieving or are being managed within the thresholds, what additional resources need to be provided, what plan needs to be charted out, and how it needs to be executed in a very systematic manner such that we again move the color from a red to a green respectively. Let's understand each one of these components very briefly and very quickly so that once we get to the highest level of discussions, we are all attuned in terms of each one of these aspects and are on the same page. So are we all able to see the screen, please? Some confirmation will help me. The first component in front of our screen is now focusing on risk appetite and risk tolerance. Every organization will try and have a risk appetite statement written across various philosophies. And a risk appetite statement will capture all the aspects of the transactions which the organization is into. So the first component of a risk appetite and tolerance matrix, as I mentioned, was the risk appetite statement. Kindly excuse me. So the first component in the risk appetite and tolerance matrix is where the organization will draw out or chart out the appetite in various parameters. And those parameters will define how the risk should be perceived by the organization and every member who's supposed to be manning a risk or manning a business process, right from its ability to raise finance to its ability to service the loans, its ability to venture into the kind of different kinds of businesses or segments, to its philosophy in terms of greenfield capex or brownfield capex, expansion in terms of tolerances or its appetite in terms of dealing with anything to do with the human workforce, and so on and so forth. So just visualize a statement which runs through all the important categories which circle the organization and which are so critical for its functioning and achieving its objectives. And for each of these parameters, the organization will go and pronounce a statement. And the statement will typically be that A, we have a high appetite, we have a medium appetite, we have a low appetite, or we have zero tolerance. Guess what? Where would an organization have zero tolerance? Health and safety, environment, social and governance, from low to zero. High appetite, typically organizations which start venturing into business and in newer territories, they would meet with a lot of competition. So they would probably try and keep a very high appetite when it comes to certain product definitions, the revenue streams, and their ability to try and take the competition, right? Non-compliance with uh, lending covenants. I think all of us would probably be giving answers here. My take is that any sincere organization would have a very low appetite in terms of dealing with non-compliances on lender covenants where they are borrowing sums, right, as a respectable lender, a borrower. And for statutory compliances, one would probably have a zero appetite or no appetite or a zero tolerance. So risk appetite is a sum total of all those parameters where the organization wants to put up its voice and say, listen, everybody around in the circle, in the stakeholders, and in the actioneers, this is how we perceive ourselves to run our business. This is how we are going to achieve our objectives for the first year, 3 year, and 5 years, respectively. And basis that, for each of those appetite or cornerstones, you will have a threshold limit, or which will define or quantify as to how do you measure from a measuring perspective. And this document, remember, has to have the blessings and the approval at a board level. It may be prepared, compiled with all the executive members and the steering committee probably empowered to do this or assigned to do this by the board, but it needs the blessings and the assent at the board level respectively to be considered as a sanctified document for the internal world and the external world to rely upon. So that's the first part. We spoke about the governance structure, which is a second cornerstone, and we just have a picture, an illustrative here for us. Typically, a governance structure has to run across the pyramid. Envision a pyramid, an organization in the form of a pyramid, and everyone, I repeat that everyone which are a part of this pyramid will contribute, but each of these layers have a goal and they have a role. Typically, the board is a sponsorer. Thereafter, we will have various risk steering committees and majority of the executive personnel along with independent directors put across will form these steering committees. It could be a risk committee, whichever be the nomenclature, but it will have a blend, right? And below this committee, you will have a risk owner segment, which is ultimately responsible for managing risks within their respective functions, processes, domains, and they will identify, they will train, they will perpetuate risk champions. It is their duty to create that kind of an environment where from being risk averse, the journey is towards becoming risk aware, back, sponsor, hold discussions, empower your team members such that everyone thinks about risk and plans way ahead rather than registers a risk much later after the event occurs. So the risk owners and the risk champions work continuously towards creating that congenial and productive environment for any organization on the basis of which the entire pyramid for risk stands, and the board is able to breathe and proclaim to the world at large that yes, our organization is risk aware. So this is a typical 4-tier structure which one would go for. Roles and responsibilities will be written for each of the layers so that they know where they are largely responsible. The RACI matrix is what we know: responsible, accountable. So the whole RACI matrix is written for each of the layers, and more importantly, their reporting protocols, their discussion protocols to come together, appraise events, and take forward-looking decisions. Come well prepared and appraise and move in the forward direction is extremely important for moving the agenda and moving the overall governance in the right direction. Now, we identified the people, the pyramid is ready, top to bottom, and appetite and the tolerances are now uniformly known across the organization. Everyone knows that it is not my perception which will work. I need to attune myself to the organization's appetite. And here are the tolerances which have been defined, which I need to keep in mind, or we need to collectively keep in our minds every single day when we go out to work. Now, the question is, how do we identify? Is there something else that we need to do? I've heard a lot of people say, and I would also probably 200% concur with everyone, all these practitioners, that risk management is like inhaling and exhaling air. It is so much a part of our daily activity that if there was anybody else who probably had a reason to believe that we will need to put extra time to manage risks, would be grossly mistaken, right? Risk management is subcutaneous. It is a part of all the activities that we do. The manner in which we do, how clinical we are, the kind of templates that we use, the way we think, the way we assess, the way we conclude, and the way we deploy our resources, and the more structured it is, defines how evolved we are in the risk capability maturity model. Again, another important tool which helps risk practitioners understand at one go, when we go to a doctor and we give them our set of symptoms, the doctor performs certain procedures and then concludes or provides a diagnosis. Similarly, risk capability maturity model is a very useful tool which helps a practitioner identify where does an organization currently stand, at which stage. Is it at a nascent stage? Is it ad hoc? Is it steady? Or is it at a very highly evolved stage, and it probably needs to a lot more to maintain that evolved stage? So that helps set up the entire framework, and hence everything which helps you stay advanced in your techniques. So I purposely chose the series of risk identification techniques, which are, from a very basic rudimentary level. Anything which basically helps you get aware of all the activities and all the events enveloping you, your business environment, can serve as risk identification techniques to the maximum advanced stage. Remember, we are in digitalization and we'll talk about it. Today, there are a lot of risk sensing tools available because A, you know your organization, you've defined your internal environment and external environment, you've categorically defined where do you operate, in which markets do you operate, what are your regulatory frameworks, what are your capital structures, what are your stakeholders. Now all it takes is a one powerful device to run every day and suck all the information which is relevant to your business from an external context to identify on its own. It will feed you with information on an online ongoing basis and keep triggering you what has occurred or what has happened of late for which your organization needs to be careful about. So from questionnaires to interviews to financial statement analysis to simple basic flowcharts, now we are at a state of smart sensing tools. That is the way the organizations have evolved the capability maturity path today, and they are rapidly using all the information to stay miles ahead, right? Black swan events will continue, but there is enough information, there is enough operational understanding which helps us deal. One COVID, the source was unknown, right? But a lot of small risk mitigations planned put together into one consolidated being over a period of time helped us bridge across this massive pandemic. So identification techniques are directly proportional to the capability, maturity of an organization and the practitioners of risk, how risk aware they are. What are they investing? Where do they think can they get the next bit of information real time to stay well ahead of any threats, or maybe not just threats. Why just threats? Uncertainties also, because we've seen there were a lot of organizations which converted threats into opportunities by virtue of knowing and being well ahead of the curve and being early movers. So risk identification techniques will slowly take us to the next step in the infrastructure, which is the most powerful tool, the most impactful tool. And again, from a most rudimentary manual document to the most evolved GRC tool, we'll probably talk about a risk register. And what do we need? I think it is extremely important to keep the level of automations at the background and always go back to the basics, because the sharper are the basics, the more evolved will be the progress in the times ahead. So extremely important that we are able to time the risk, we are able to uniquely identify the risk, we are able to classify the nature, the category, we are able to describe it. And believe me, there is a set or a syntax or a rule in which we write our risk statements also. We'll talk about that also. And thereafter, we get into everything which helps us identify what is the root cause or the source for that particular risk. What are the inherent risks? Are we able to control it to a certain extent? And what is the extent of control that we are able to put across? And then if there are certain missing gaps, what are those missing gaps in the form of residual risks, right? And those residual risks will necessarily need deployment of resources. So what are those resources? And eventually, if I'm going to put something out of my pocket as an organization, whom should I hold accountable? And by what time will I be able to see further progress and a change of a color? Red always means risky, green means I'm in control. right? So a sum total of all these aspects, if are curated and available for a decision maker on an online or a real-time basis, the job is done. This is the most effective and the most important tool in the entire risk management. I would say it is a cycle, it's an ongoing cycle where it finds its power through this particular tool. And having said that, today there are numerous GRC tools which are available where organizations are now moving into the concept of integrated assurance. And I'm sure many of my colleagues here would know what integrated assurance is. For your simplicity sake, integrated assurance in today's world means where we start with our risk assessment, we prioritize our risk areas, we do our risk registers, and then we get into the controls from financial reporting perspective or SOX perspective, and then seamlessly run our internal audit program and give a complete 360-degree view of how do we want to run the entire risk and assurance process seamlessly, right? With technology, without technology, most of them now migrating to higher levels of technology through GRC portals or governance, risk and compliance tools. Many brands would not talk about them. I'm not here to sell any of these brands, but very effective in today's uh, landscape, in today's perspective. I think most of the evolved organizations today have chosen a path which basically help them practice integrated assurance today. Now I spoke about, and we spoke about, a format or a type in which a risk should be written. And most of us will have seen a lot of risk registers during the course of our study, practice, reviews, you know, in as many extended business or professional discussions. But it is extremely important, and I have learned the hard yards when I was a student, that the syntax or a rule is done with a purpose. And let us understand what is the rule for writing a very powerful risk statement. So there are three components to it. The first component is the event of uncertainty. What is the event of uncertainty which we want to describe? Thereafter, the second component within the statement should always be the root cause. What causes this event of uncertainty? And till the time we nail this root cause or we address this root cause, the consequence or the impact will keep hitting us. There is another component, the fourth component, which is velocity. At what rate will it keep hitting us? How frequently will it keep hitting us, right? And that forms an integral part when we talk about quantitative risk analysis. But at least these three components need to be defined in a risk statement. So just a few examples, since I'm a practitioner of capital projects, construction infrastructure, and it is fairly simple to understand. I thought, I will share these examples and try and curate these three components here. So when you bid for a tender, you perform rate analysis, right, for all the items or executable items within the project. So this risk relates to this particular aspect, that incorrect rate analysis, that's the event of uncertainty, my friend. Incorrect item rate analysis at the tendering stage due to unrealistic assumptions may lead to incorrect cost estimations, making the bid erroneous and or non-competitive, right? So event of uncertainty, root cause, and finally, what are the consequences which we face? Either we get the tender at a disastrous rate where we probably want to say, no, I don't want it. Or You've just quoted something where you were far away from people who were right there, who had got it absolutely right, and you're just out of the competition, right? Similarly, there's another example which talks about overwhelming project compulsions and pressures from the project manager may curb assertiveness and independence of quality managers at site, leading to compromise in quality enforcement. Another subject where I could probably share a lot, but I would restrict myself. Again, there is an event of uncertainty, there is a root cause, and there is a distinct impact or consequences if the root cause is not addressed. So three things again, whenever you look at the risk statement, whichever format it is written, if the risk statement does not feed these three components from a risk perspective, the event of uncertainty, the root cause, and the impact, I think it is an important statement. There is nothing that can be done further on that particular risk, even if anybody were to put their resources to treat that particular risk. So once we've done the identification, the most important part is to analyze it, because just knowing a risk does not help. We need to move step by step towards. And there are, as we mentioned, that there are two dimensions, there are three dimensions: impact, likelihood, velocity. We'll discuss impact and likelihood. Velocity is typically done in a three-dimensional model where we typically augment. Once we get the probability and the impact, we just multiply it if we are expecting it to happen n number of times, and it's just a simple product from there onwards. But let's understand that, will we be worried by a risk only by the sheer magnitude of how it is going to hit us? How many of us were worried about COVID or a pandemic or an epidemic just before it struck? Nobody, right? So this is a classic example where the impact, which is phenomenal, and the same type of a pandemic was last documented 100 years ago, okay, which had huge amount of casualties. There were nations and economies which were busted completely, but who cared a damn about it, right? Huge impact, but again, very low on likelihood or probability. Nobody cared about it, right? So impact by itself is not a determinant. It is into the product with the likelihood, and the likelihood is where we have a reason to believe that the occurrence will happen, and if it happens, the chances is that it will happen by so much of percentage. And then finally, we do a product and we come to a final understanding, which helps us take a final decision from the risk mitigation and from a risk assessment perspective. And remember, my friends, once we've understood a risk, we've understood the magnitude, and similarly, if we have a counter, if the organization shows certain resilience, if there are certain activities or there are certain programs which are actually meant to work as a counter to this particular risk, the strength of those actions, the strength of the resources put together also need to be rated in order to arrive at a residual risk. And residual risk, if high, you should lose your sleep and you should get to work immediately in mitigating that particular component. Inherent risk by itself is a subject which is of theory. It needs to be countered by whatever the organization currently has. If the organization does not have anything, then inherent risk is equal to the residual risk. Now, that completes the analysis part, right? The people who are supposed to govern are there. The appetite is known to everyone. They have actually gone ahead, defined their risks. They have tools. They've analyzed them. Now, tell me, my friends, how many organizations have we seen where the culture of risk is there to demonstrate? I know there are a lot of awards which are given from Golden Peacock and so on and so forth. But tell me one instance where you were super impressed with the risk atmosphere or the risk management culture where you saw that culture and it was live and kicking across all levels. Otherwise, we've seen that there are voices which are stifled at each levels, and huge amount of moderation happens in the name of risk moderation or risk management, and the real risks seldom reach up. The only message which reaches up is all is well. Let me try and pictorially depict something which I saw in an organization where I played the role of a consultant, and I was mightily impressed that theory actually translated into huge amount of practice because there was solid backing from the management. They wanted to make it happen, and they created that kind of an environment where risk was extremely important and every practitioner of risk would be protected, would be hailed. So let's look at this particular pictorial story which unfolds on this particular page. At the grassroots level, we had a friend who was a risk champion. He identified a risk and he assessed the risk. Now, you remember the example that I gave while we were just trying to define the risks, the first example? So this was a construction company, right? And this team member was a part of integrated assurance and risk management. And it was going through tenders win-loss analysis. And he did fair amount of research, deep digging, and came to a conclusion that the activity of tendering and item rate analysis was a risk. We lost most of our tenders because the rates that we quoted were off target, way off target from the market. And this organization practiced a 5x5 matrix. 5 rating scale for impact, 5 rating scale for likelihood. The product of the same would give me an inherent risk. So our friend, I would call him as Johnny, right? Johnny, he did a lot of work. He backed himself with all the numbers, spreadsheets. He prepared a very strong presentation, and he rated this risk at 5 into 525 because the rate or the bidding to conversion rate was a disastrous rate, especially when one particular angle of mechanical and electrical services, or MEP as it is called, was a part of the integrated tender. What did he do? Johnny referred the risk and the assessment to his boss, which is the chief risk officer, or in this case, the person who was double hatting, since the organization was not at an evolved stage but was doing its level best to be risk aware, the person who was responsible for risk and compliance and risk management put together, his immediate boss. So I would call him as boss here. So Johnny went and discussed this particular risk, the entire set of workings, tender by tender, rate analysis by rate analysis, zeroing down at where the entire thing was derailing. He did a statistical analysis to prove his point because he knew that he would meet with huge amount of skepticism. So he came prepared and he told his boss, I rate this risk as 5x5, 25. Again, there was professional skepticism from the boss. And he said, why do you feel so? Don't you know that this organization spends a lot in terms of getting the right set of talent, and we have the right set of people doing this? Do you think when we go to the COO, will he listen to us? We should be absolutely careful, right? And let's do one thing. In my mind, this is 5 by 5, 25. But to start the conversation on the right note, I'm asking you to downgrade it to a 5 by 4 into 20. Now, this may sound discouraging and very typical, but the ardent junior or the risk champion or of the risk owner, Johnny, he listened to his boss and he downgraded the rating from a 25 to a 20. And the boss said, okay, let's go and consult the COO now. Let us see how does the COO, the CEO, who are a part of the risk steering committee, look at this particular piece of statistical analysis which you've done, which backs the rating. Because according to them, probably the rating would not be that high. But he encourages, he takes his team member along and they go in and discuss this particular matter with the COO. Now, the COO listens to this entire risk narrative and the assessment and everything which backs up to the assessment, and then puts his thinking cap on. And then certain basic unbiased questions are put across to the people who brought this particular risk assessment to the center. And he says, but look, yes, we know the numbers are there to tell us what is our success ratio and what is our conversion. But we have a team and we have a team member who we thought was doing the job. How good? Not sure of. But yes, this was something which was on my mind as well. And then instead of tearing apart the people who brought the problem statement or brought the assessment, this is where the COO gets into his level of fact finding to uphold or to probably redirect the assessment. And the COO now calls actually the person who is doing the rate analysis. And this gentleman is actually an MEP engineer who, when called upon at 6 p.m. in the evening, was outside the office and was rushing back into the premises. So here the COO spoke to him and told him, my friend, we have certain things to discuss. Where are you? Can we meet you? And the MEP engineer, almost like most of the juniors do, or most of the subordinates do, was taken aback when the call came and he started, pensively talking to his boss, stating, boss, I'm coming to the office. I've had a long day today. I started 8 in the morning and I've been running from one site to another site to another site. I didn't even get to time to eat my lunch. I'm so busy. I'm just coming. I'll see you in the office. So there was basic fact finding done by the COO. And then the second question, when this gentleman arrived in the office, the COO asked him that, Mr. Y, when do you get time to sit and do the rate analysis for all these tenders which you send me? I know your mail hits me early in the morning, just before the bidding time. You give me 2 hours before I go through the entire cost working, and when we are about for a tendering. But tell me something, do you have enough time, or you have enough time but somewhere you are not diligent? Nobody would care to probably hold back once the question of diligence is put across. And this gentleman just erupted. He made an emotional plea. He said, sir, I work 2 shifts. I work for 10 hours on the sites, and then in the evening I come back and then I respond to all these item rate analysis. I do my best, sir. I have never ever given up on my job. And yes, I sit through the night and I do this and I send it back to you. That is where the COO realized that indeed there was a problem. And the problem had never surfaced because the organization was meeting the basic requirement of, and the members of his team were meeting the tender deadlines. How good they were, the results were there to show. And how real was the assessment? It was 100% correct. That the item rate analysis, as identified by the risk team and fearlessly put across through the chain, was actually a big risk. They were short in terms of staff. A person who was toiling through 10 hours, 11 hours in the daytime, physically doing the hard yards on the sites, was then in the evening after office hours sitting to probably put his brain, to get the item rate analysis and the tenders right, which was defining the future of the organization in the most, we would say, in the most unproductive time zone and with lesser resources. So that is where the COO now stepped into his role. Remember, we're talking about the roles. And he said, fantastic, Johnny. Thank you so much. I think the risk is rightly appraised. It has to be a high risk. It has to be 5 by 525. And then next step, first thing of a risk aware organization and a risk upholding organization was to allow the risk to surface and rate it at the right possible level rather than downgrading it or stifling it, and then immediately taking a mitigation action to nip the root cause out. The next call made by the COO was to the HR officer, asking for identifying similar skill sets, not one but two resources, such that one particular resource runs around with this gentleman to ensure that all the sites are working properly, and another resource who sits full time in the office and carries out the item rate analysis under the guidance of this experienced person, so that every number which is worked out is correct, is authentic, is worth the risk that the organization is running, and then the bids go through and they are realistic. And what happens? Everyone is back to winning ways. So here is the culture which really impressed me, and I wish that most of the organizations, irrespective of their capability maturity, I have seen the most evolved organizations to the evolving organizations, they stifle the voice of risk managers and risk owners to an extent where, in the name of governance, in the name of whatever, the real voice does not reach. And if the real voice does not reach, or the real risk assessment never makes it to the top, the governance function will be doing the biggest disservice, and the board or the sponsor will really not know where the ship is heading in the direction. So this is the type of a setup which upholds risks, which does their fact finding, which is open, and which takes quick mitigation calls, is the ideal set of a situation, or the sought for situation, which I would consider, or us should consider, as highly evolved from a capability risk maturity model. A culture of open dialogue and empowerment at all levels greatly benefits the risk management, and that organization will always win. Now, risk mitigation. We spoke about risk mitigation. When we talk about risk treatments or risk mitigations, there has to be a process. The process has to lead to different strategies, and whatever course is decided to be taken upon, there has to be effective tracking and monitoring, because eventually the moment you talk about risk and you talk about solution, it is going to have a financial implication. There will be money which will have to be committed. monies will have to be spent. And hence, if there is an investment and commitment made by the organization, it is extremely important for all the practitioners of risk to ensure that treatments are procedural, they are objective, they are absolutely bulleted and very clear in terms of activities, timelines, resources, and they are tracked to the hilt to ensure that the entire effort is moving progressively in the right direction. And yes, the strategy if is to reduce the maximum effort of treatment is where it goes to reduce. If it is transfer, we get into the insurance. If it is to retain, that means the inherent risk per se itself is extremely high, that the reduction may not be the best, or probably on the other extreme, we have a reason to believe that the likelihood may not be that great, but the impact may be extremely high. So depending upon the strategy, a methodical procedural treatment, objectively meted out and monitored, tracked to the core, will help achieve the objectives. And certain prerequisites, which I spoke of when I was giving a quick overview, every root cause should at least have one treatment plan. If there are bundle of root causes put across and just one single holistic treatment, then the chances are that it will be an eye washer, because every root cause has to be systematically treated. And like Uma mentioned, Rekha mentioned that every risk can at best be reduced. It cannot be eliminated. The risks remain in the risk universe. The most important thing is to identify them, address them, curb them to a level where they are controllable and they do not obstruct the objectives of the organization. The second would be treatment plans need to be modular in nature with clear-cut action steps. Every step has to be clear, modular. Treatment plans can be described at a concept level for low risk ratings. However, with higher rating, they need to be fairly articulated with a detailed action plan, subtasks, dates for implementation. We've seen risk registers with half a line, 1 line, 2 line, summarily just talking about some random treatment. Those risk registers will never work. Those risk treatments will never work. Especially when the color is red or an amber, there need to be detailed plans with detailed accountabilities. Pre-articulated treatment plans must be validated to withstand the test of time. Current set of challenges either be fine-tuned or revamped to achieve the desired mitigation. And every treatment plan should have a clear-cut responsibility and accountability point. There have to be individuals identified. You incentivize them when the risk is curbed. You basically take an action when the risk degrades further. And to top it up, how do we ensure that the cycle is moving correctly? You again go back to the governance and you go back to every layer of governance. And we spoke about these layers distinctly previously as well. The sponsors depend upon decision makers. The decision makers will look forward to the custodians, which are the risk owners, and the custodians will back their risk champions who are actually on the ground every day executing every task, every activity, every plan of the larger business plan. And more importantly, the key stakeholders need to timely compile, consolidate, and report the updated risk registers and related information on frequency defined at different layers. So it is the frequency and meeting upon. We've seen organizations which fix up calendars but seldom show up, and eventually you have a quarterly discussion which is again an eye washer. So you may have the best of the designs. It is the earnestness of an organization which will propel it higher on the capability maturity path. Now, automation, we spoke about that multiple tools available, multiple portals available now, which can help not only capture from a risk register point of view, but also serve as intelligent dashboards on and help assess the risks on real-time basis. And many organizations have startling examples of how the governance thrives on all these portals and are able to take very efficient decisions. Lastly, since we're talking about the culture, we spoke about the culture and we started with the framework. We've covered 2 out of the 3 parts by the time now. Let's talk about the challenges as I have been voicing them in these slides. The most important component is a buy-in. We spoke about sponsors, right, in the previous slide, which is the apex part of the pyramid. Now, failure to obtain a buy-in from the executive management will literally derail the ERM plan. Nothing moves. ERM plans have always moved to begin with from a top to a bottom governance. So it has to be top-down driven approach to begin with. There are 2 management hierarchy styles or the hybrid, bottoms up and top to bottom. So this has to be a top-down driven initiative if it has to sustain, survive, and be thriving over a period of time. Now, extremely important is developing a center of excellence. Center of excellence would mean a lot of things coming together, having rich real-time archival of all the risks. People who understand the risks are brought together, to address majority of the complex risks, because the risk when an organization faces, they are not modular. They are all complex, jumbled up, and will need several heads to come together and tackle them. And hence, having the right set of people, having a center of excellence is extremely important. Embed risk management in day-to-day operations in the form of roles, responsibilities, and then have the matrices, the KRAs and KPIs, and the resultant scoreboards to make people accountable. Lack of planning and foresight in spreading the awareness, training, communication, and sustaining the program often results in taking the steam away out of all the effort which may have been put top down. And more importantly, when there is a person like Johnny who is thinking about the organization, the least that you do is stifle his or her voice. Incentivize, hold them, laud them. More importantly, address everything which has been done in the right spirit to make the organization risk aware. Incentivize. Taking just a small pause here and recapitulating that the definition of ERM is what we understood. We understood the important framework. We just completed the framework and seamlessly we spoke about culture. It is all about culture now, more than trying to meet those fine lines of traditional ERM or risk management, which was very finance centric. And seamlessly moving on, that what does the stakeholders need today? And what is the board entrusted with? And what is the management entrusted with? Uncertainty, heightened uncertainty. We're talking about globalization. We're talking about digitalization. The speed of the transactions in digitalization is where I want to underscore or underline digitalization. Big data, greater instability and volatility. We still have a war, and that war is now 2 months, right? And hell is breaking loose on a lot of economies put together. So in such a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain world, what do we do? Do we limit ourselves to risk listing, standalone processes, silos, or only keep talking about qualitative risk management? Or just focus on day-to-day activities and then probably think that everything will fall in place? That time is gone. So what is the time now? What is the time asking for us risk practitioners to focus on? Let's address the last part and a very interesting part. Well, there are many trends which are available to introspect, to discuss, to read upon, but to my mind, or collectively, to everyone to whom I go back to derive my understanding on the subject, these are the 5 standout trends which all of us will have to imbibe and work towards and play our respective role wherever we can. The first point, and I read them and then we go to each one of them, is see ERM from a competitive advantage perspective. Don't whine and don't feel that it is only and only to mitigate a problem. There is a huge amount of opportunity if you are an early mover. So it is all about the mindset. The first point is to probably do with every practitioner to change their mindset, and with every practitioner, organizations will change their mindset. The second point trending is, as I mentioned earlier on, if we keep looking at the top level all the time, if we keep looking at risks which seldom happen, we will lose the ground. We will lose the ground where we stand. And hence today there are larger voices which are talking about operations risk management as much in the same breath as enterprise risk management. An enterprise will face an external world which is highly uncertain, but you cannot plan for things which are way uncertain. If you start over focusing on things which are uncertain, you will lose sight internally, and if you're not strong internally, you cannot win external battles. This is the rationale which is coming up, and why it is coming up is from an investment perspective, is from an outlook perspective. That is what we'll discuss. The third trend is definitely quantification. I think we are all late. It had to be done tomorrow. There are only a few setups or few industries even today who are probably talking quantification or have imbibed risk quantification. Capital projects definitely have, insurance, treasury, the financial and capital markets probably have extra yards taken, but the rest of the businesses are still thinking quantification. Do we? Oh, should we? This is a mindset change which is required. And then time is ticking, right? I think all of us have been reading tons and tons, and we've been experiencing a lot of drama around. We are experiencing, right? There's a temperature which is soaring out. You're fighting, we don't want the temperature to rise to 2 degrees. Hell will break loose. We're trying to say, oh, that 2 degrees should be maintained at 1.5 degrees as a global rise in temperature. And even to maintain or cut down that 0.5 degree of temperature, the whole world needs to come together, and needs to come together like now, right? And there is a big divide between the developed countries and the developing countries such as ours, the third world countries, which are fighting tooth and nail. They have the reserves, and they probably have a reason to believe that they are not on an equal footing if carbon emission was to be controlled. There is a greater damage which the developed nations are doing, and there are fist fights happening around. But what is it for a risk practitioner? Should we just allow that conundrum to happen and not be mindful of the fact that there is a lot from a regulatory perspective, from a financial perspective, which will start hitting us if our GRC program or our risk management program is not intelligent and imbibes all this well before we are forced or regulated to. Remember, if there is no self-assessment, there will be regulation. So this is the time where GRC or risk management has to meet environment, social and governance or ESG put together. It's still not late. It's in the nick of time. How many of us have an integrated program which talks and which is actually running ESG driven ERM? And lastly, we spoke about digitalization. We were all packed for 2 years, right? Every activity of consumption was happening door to door. It was happening contactless. All the businesses all of a sudden work from home, WFH became the norm, and the most busy traffic was that of the networks. So with them, there were a lot of risks which came into being, right? So share of technology, tools and enablers, called as tech stacks in consulting parlance and in and IT world, every tool and enabler which helps integrate, and hence it is called IGRC. We'll deal about that also. Integrated governance, risk controls is the norm today, and the horizon is as broad as one could probably imagine from a technology standpoint of view. So these are the 5 trends. Let us delve a little detail. So we spoke about this mindset, right? And let me just go back and again give the example of that same giant, the retail company. I don't want to name it, but it is opening a lot of branches here. The other hasn't been able to reach India shows, but this has, right? One in Hyderabad, one in Mumbai, and so on and so forth. It had super plans, and everyone in India was thrilled to have it. Oh, we are going to go and buy our furniture from here. We're going to do this. We're going to do that, and come COVID, smash, shut down, complete shutdown. What did this giant organization do? It sat, with all the investments, huge capex investments which it made in India. No, plan B was ready. It mobilized its team to ensure that there are contactless pickups and contactless deliveries, and so that the footfalls which were not received were slowly captured and covered, and whatever payback period for their capexes which they made in India, the plans which they had, they never suffered. They got delayed, but there was no denial. There was delay, there was no denial. And slowly, they got caught back with their numbers. So ERM has to be seen with a competitive advantage. Talk opportunity the moment you talk about ERM. Second, operations that we spoke of. Now, this question I read and I was really intrigued. It says, how can risk teams address potentially catastrophic events if their occurrence is rare or they never occur from an enterprise level perspective? I mean, what do you want me to imagine when it just happens once in 200 years? How much will I document? How much will I create a repository? How much will I archive? How much will I pull back? It's too much uncertain, right? Unknown unknowns. So to address this, the point which has been picking up in most of the councils or congresses or discussions at various forums on risk management is focus internally and then focus externally. We've forgotten simple things in life. We started over complicating things. So when you focus internally, you will get smaller solutions, and those smaller solutions will help you fight a larger solution when it comes, and which is completely unknown. COVID was one example. Pandemics were all forgotten. We did not know, as I just mentioned, but smaller things which we started doing, started asking about well-being of people, You know, when those well-being calls were being made, what was the organization trying to do? They were trying to figure, where is my resource base? How scattered is it? Point number one. Point number two, if I were to make them productive, what is the extra cost which will I have to incur as a capex in networking, in reaching out to them, making them productive again? How can we restore business, and what is the additional amount of capital that we'll have to infuse, or what will we have to do? So smaller aspects, from well-being, questions on well-being, to actual well-being and back-end preparation to get things back to normal, excuse me, is all that was being constantly being worked upon. Then aspects of hygiene, you know, aspects of isolation, all those aspects which were probably identified at operational levels were all put together, and one combined concentrated view helped us solve a lot of external unknowns. The most important thing is operations. Get domain expertise. Ensure that every operational risk which is possible in your particular task, activity, event, process, organization should be understood, captured, repositorized, because it is operations and people around operations which are extremely critical for an organization to survive. The support businesses will probably have an attrition, but if there is an attrition, an unfortunate attrition within the core operations, then the organization loses its shine. So there is a huge amount of discussion again going on operations risk, and to get it at par with enterprise risks, right? This is a known unknown. It is important to equally invest in a known unknown rather than an unknown unknown. The third trend, which is the order of the day, and we spoke about that, is to do with risk quantification, friends. And again, there is a lot of technological help, but we'll come back to the basics. We'll again come back to how do you quantify. And there are two ways. Either we have a very strong far sight, okay, or we learn from the hindsight. Hindsight is a very good teacher when it comes to quantification. And quantification will happen if the loss events were not just pushed around the carpet, but they were seen eye to eye. We had the guts to identify a loss event, talk about it, like in our example where the rate analysis was disastrously, affecting the future of this construction company. They were not winning work. Somebody had to sit, take it by the scruff of its neck and talk about the problem and figure out, oh, we did not have the right bandwidth of right people. Simple. We had the people, but we did not have the right bandwidth. So loss events help, and if they are articulated and if they are captured, they are the best starting points to quantify the velocity, the impact, and hence the overall risk quantification. And trust me, qualitative risk management will not be able to give a result beyond a point of time. There will be a tipping point beyond which your ERM program will not be able to progress if risk quantification is not planted or is groomed within the overall scheme of things. We spoke about ESG and GRC. All that I want to put across is that this is the most interesting time. A lot of organizations are engaging with experts, and they are completely rehashing the way they are operating, they are existing, what they are choosing to consume, what they are choosing to build, operate on, everything. Because as I said, if there is no self-assessment, you will be regulated. And today there are a lot of financial bodies, providers of finance, lenders, who've now taken the onus within their ESG statements that these are the people, or these are the industries, or these are the set of businesses where we will invest, and these are the businesses, bye bye, sorry, we will not fund you. Done. So what if you are coal? So for what you are crude oil? Doesn't matter. Bye bye. So having a program which is running neck and neck with all these evolving possibilities from a governance, stringent governance and environment and social parameters, is now the order of the day, and ensuring that the program is really delivering and mitigating all these aspects before there is a regulation which hits us, or there is some kind of a failure which probably holds back the achievement of objectives. And to talk about everything to do with digitalization, right? Everything to do with security, everything to do with IT, third parties. Of course, there was a huge amount of third party involvement, but today I think core sourcing and outsourcing is not just for auditors. Uh, Today, every organization tries to retain its core, which helps enhance the shareholder value. And every set of business process which is neutral or doesn't add value to the organization is outsourced. And today there are specialists, outsourcing companies, which perform those particular roles to perfection at minimal cost and with huge amount of standards. But at the end of the day, they are outsiders, right? And come what may, they may have a brand, they may have a repute at stake, they may have the best of the quality standards. There is an interface between them and us, and the strength of this interface will determine how much at risk are we and them from a risk management perspective. And these are the important aspects. And what do we do now as risk practitioners? What are the focus areas which we should be looking upon when we try to talk about technology stacks or try and classify them from a GRC perspective, which will help us manage well, write good policies, help do integrated risk assessments, define what a risk posture should be. When we talk about risk posture, means again, should we be worried about? Posture is directly proportionate to the appetite, my friends, and hence you build tolerances around. So, couple of classifications from a risk stack or tools perspective were very nicely laid out in my reading, which I wanted to share with all of you all. So, the first component is basically to gather, as I mentioned, that there are a lot of the organization from where I come from has got a phenomenal tool which is called risk intelligence. It's a phenomenal tool which can just at any point of time, depending upon how we've configured our requirements, it will pull all the news. It will pull all the news that you need and will help you classify depending upon the parameters that you've put across, you know, and that will help you just conclude and take further decisions, whether to do with geopolitical, whether with natural disasters, markets, finances, exchange rate fluctuations, which are a result of certain geopolitical events, and so on and so forth. Third party risk assessment tools, which will probably look at when we deal with third parties, we know that there are they could be cross-border entities. They could have their root and origin in some other countries. Are those countries sanctioned? Are there security breaches with them, which could have a cascading effect on us, their financial health, and so on and so forth? Security systems that have to do with cyber attacks, right? Cyber security breaches, vulnerabilities, and of course there are a lot of who get periodically done the VAPTs or the vulnerability assessment and penetration tests. So an entire focus on cyber security is probably being ramped up with state of the art technology stacks and tools which are available in the market today. It is important that we have all these doors and fortresses, the doors of the fortresses, guarded, or we have as a risk function depending upon our capacity to invest and the scale and the size of the organization where we are. We have all these factored in our programs. And then more importantly, after having gone digital, And even before that, the greatest influence which was in the virtual world was to do with social media. So social media and the ill effects of social media and the way we are able to manage our set of activities, campaigns, programs, the ill effects and the overall impact on the brand and the reputation is something which needs to be actively monitored, assessed, mitigated, and again continuously being monitored over a period of time. And lastly, for the pandemics and similar type of black swan events, I think one thing which has stood ground and today everyone is acknowledging the potency and the strength of predictive analytics, right? How many of us are actually doing a course on data science today? I'm sure there will be at least 25 to 30% people who've already registered for courses on data science, artificial intelligence and machine learning. And yes, that's a testimony to the fact that predictive analysis is really powerful enough in order to reduce the extent of impact which a black swan event could have, by preparing ourselves way ahead of the curve. So all these aspects collectively put across as enablers or must-haves from a technology perspective are critical on ERM and the preparation for ERM. And with this point, I take a long pause now and just summarize and go back to the previous slide, which talks about these trends. And mind you, you may have many more to add. I'm very happy to listen to everyone here. Let's spread knowledge. Let's get clinical when it comes to our set of assessments. Let's stay strong and positive when we do an assessment, and it should not just be an aspirational assessment. It is extremely important when we as risk practitioners pick up a risk or identify a risk. The assessment of the risk is going to have consequences, because if the organization has honest intentions, they are going to invest, they are going to spend. So we be 200% right in our assessments. So again, the mindset of competitive advantage, equal importance to the known unknown, which is the operational risks, rather than the unknown unknown, which is at an enterprise level, unforeseen, undekha, anjana types, risk quantification, and ESG imbibed within the ERM program, and every door of the fortress packed from a technology perspective are the trends that we need to probably work on. With this, I would want to thank everyone here. Sorry for the disturbances in between, if any, and let's interact, let's learn mutually. I know there are a lot of people who would probably add more than what these 20 slides or this 100 odd minutes of talk time did. I'm really raring to listen to all of you and probably hear your set of experiences, because trust me, nobody can claim themselves to be experts in this particular field. I am no exception. Thank you so much. I conclude my presentation with this particular aspect. I'm happy for any kind of interaction and probably hear from you all.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your time spent on knowledge dissemination. And I have given rights to unmute themselves. Audience can unmute themselves and interact as they wish. And there is one question. I think you have to answer this one. Just see whether it's visible. Sir. Yes. Hello, sir. Is my screen visible?
Yes, the screen is visible. Thank you.
Question.
Right. So the question is how to arrive at risk appetite and tolerance for an organization. Thank you so much. Very fundamental question. Now, all the organizations go on a business plan. They have an objective. And trust me, it all starts with a vision, right? And that vision then starts taking a few words. And then everyone who's seen the world enough, experienced in their domains, come together and start finding a meaning from that word and the few statements. into their own respective domains with numbers attached, and there are huge amount of iterations which happen, and we have a business plan. The promoter might just end up saying that we want to grow 30% year on year for the next 3 years. That's a statement. After that, the entire council or the midriff or the executive management sits together. Chairman sir said grow 30%. What does it mean? We necessarily will have to have certain other business segments to embark upon, which means we will have to go to other territories, which means that we will have to go into competition, and hence we will have to probably do something which they are not doing, or we will have to have better sourcing, and so on and so forth. And from one particular point, several things get developed. Yeah. So what happens is there's a constant deliberation and expansion of the wish list into a business plan. But for every expansion that we do, we try and say that, okay, I have to grow by 30%. So then I need to go to certain uncharted markets. But remember, I will not go to Africa. But remember, I will not go to China. But remember, if I go to Africa, I will not go to Ethiopia. We are defining our appetites. Or what we are saying, I have high appetite to go to Cape Town and South Africa, but I have very low appetite to go to Ethiopia and Kenya, right? So whenever you have anything which is defined, which goes in defining your business plan, in the same breath, you will also define what should limit your business plan or what you should not do. That exercise is a constant brainstorming exercise, which takes slowly a shape, and then it finally is a refined product of 30 or 40 statements, which covers the entire business in the way the business is going to be conducted, which clearly says that we have a very high appetite for inclusion and diversion. So diversification, which means that we will have specialized jobs, not just from a gender perspective, but we will have a wider inclusion, and we will touch everyone within the society, whether it is the lesser privileged or whichever section, but we will ensure that we have certain set of activities where we will man or get them done by such kind of people. And the moment that appetite is clear, you will start having certain matrices to measure. For example, the moment we say all front office jobs will be done by, since we have a high appetite for diversity and inclusion, the matrice which will be made, or the tolerance which will be made. Can I request somebody to go on mute? There is a lot of disturbance, please.
I will check, sir. We have unmuted everyone, and there's someone unmuted.
Yeah. So for every appetite, we will tolerances, and the tolerances will define as to how you want to achieve that particular business plan, keeping the appetite into consideration. So the moment I said that we have high degree of tolerance for diversity and inclusion, and then the management device that all front-end offices, whether to do with people, whether to do with sales, will be with people from diversity and inclusion, right? And there is an ice cream parlor or an ice cream joint here, I can talk about in Mumbai, which has front faces or CRM representatives only from the autism segment, right? So that is basically a translation of a business plan and appetite, which is there to see. So when that particular business plan, which is limited by the appetite or limitations and has a threshold which is defined, is controllable, the organization has a working appetite. Am I able to answer your question? A yes or no would also help.
Yes, sir. So we'll see any other question, or else audience can unmute themselves and they can interact with the speaker. So you unmute everyone, sir, and let them take it.
Happy to take questions.
Yes, and one question that we receive in mail also, we'll send it to you over. So when time permits, we can respond it and along with the feedback. So let me just
Certainly.
see for any questions, if any. And other two questions which came up, we already responded in the presentation itself. So I didn't take up those questions actually.
Sure.
An audience, is there any questions? So you want to interact with the speaker, or else any experience to be shared with the speaker? You can unmute and speak. Okay, there is one thing as risk appetite measured in terms of money by Ms. Padmini. Is Ms. screen visible, sir? Yeah, this one.
Right. So if I got the name correct, Padmini, right? Thank you for the question.
Yes.
Risk appetite is always going to be a statement which will be reflective of your risk bearing ability. So either you will say that our risk appetite is very high, subjective, is medium to high, is medium, is low, okay, or there is zero tolerance. Risk appetites are always written in this particular language. The moment you put a threshold, it will have a quantifiable limit, and that is where it will be measured in terms of monetary terms. So thresholds are monetary, thresholds are made for risk appetite, but risk appetite statements are written in English language, which are subjective in nature and which show a contour. As I said, very high, high to medium, medium to low, low, zero. Risk appetite statements are written accordingly, and for every appetite parameter, there will be a threshold. That threshold will be quantifiable. Money, units, whatever. So, hope that answers.
Ma'am, Padmini.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Is there any other question from members? Sir, will you be getting the slides that is used on this session, sir, so that we can circulate among the members along with the recording of the session? Post.
Sure. Definitely.
Thank you. In that case, maybe there are no more questions, and if there is any, if they will be writing us over mails actually, we will share it to you over mails along with the feedback. So when time permits, you can respond it. Thank you so much for addressing on the second time in SIRC, and excellent presentation, sir. And we look forward to have you in physical in situation.
My pleasure.
Yes, sir. And thank you so much for your time spent here, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All the best to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.